Even after 34 years, there's a difference between justice and closure. The brutal cold case murder of 4 teenage girls is one step closer to closed, but not to justice. Their names were Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, age 13, all found tied up, shot in the head, and set on fire inside a yogurt shop in Austin.
I first learned about this case from People Investigates, the TV show, The Yogurt Shop Murders. One thing that stood out to me during that episode was how strongly they implied that at least 2 people were involved in committing this quadruple murder.
The swabs that DPS gathered and then analyzed indicated sexual assault.
DNA from multiple males is discovered on the swabs of 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and 13-year-old Amy Ayers, but not Eliza Thomas.
That told us there had to be at least 2 perpetrators there.
In the show, investigators talked about 2 men being the last ones seen inside the yogurt shop before it closed, 2 different weapons being used, and 2 different DNA profiles found. Everything added up to 2 people being involved in this crime. But then in September 2025, Austin police announced they'd identified 1 man and said he acted alone.
We now have evidence linking a specific individual to this case, Robert Eugene Brashers. The only physical evidence located at that scene has been matched to him. Brashers died by suicide in 1999 after a standoff with police in Missouri. And his DNA has since been, and before this connection, he has been connected to murders and rapes across the country.
That's a pretty big shift from everything we've heard over the last 3 decades. So I wanted to dig into this because while the case looks solved on paper, there's still partial DNA profile that hasn't been fully explained. Maybe the police know more than they've let on, or maybe not. Either way, we're going to go back through the case piece by piece and see, is the case truly solved or just finally closed? It was December 6, 1991 in Austin, Texas. A cool Friday night in North Austin, near Anderson Lane. Inside a small frozen yogurt shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Harbison were closing up the shop for the night. Jennifer's 15-year-old sister, Sarah, and her 13-year-old friend, Amy Ayers, had come by to hang out and go home with them afterwards. It was something they did often. The sisters worked at the shop and Amy liked to tag along. They'd eat leftover yogurt, help clean up, laugh, and make plans for the weekend. Nothing about that night stood out. The girls locked the front doors around 11 p.m., counted the till, and started wiping down tables. Just before midnight, firefighters responded to reports of heavy smoke pouring from the strip mall. When Engine 12 pulled up, flames were already pushing through the roof. Inside, the air was suffocating, black, boiling, and toxic. Firefighters crawled on their knees, searching for anyone trapped inside. In the back room, under the collapsed ceiling tiles, one firefighter's flashlight caught something on the ground. "There's a body," he said. Then he looked again. "There's another." 3 girls were found together, their bodies burned almost beyond recognition. About 10 feet away, another victim, later identified as 13-year-old Amy Ayers, had crawled toward the front of the store before being shot again. When the fire was extinguished, investigators realized what they were looking at wasn't just a fire scene, it was a mass murder. The victims were naked, bound with their own clothing, and each shot in the head.
All 4 girls were tied with their own underwear, brassieres, and was shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber pistol.
There were 2 guns used, a .22 and a .380. The .22, the round is small and soft, and it's just about impossible to get ballistics off a .22. The .380 round that had been used on Amy, found it in a drain, and it was perfectly preserved. The lands and grooves told us exactly what kind of gun it was. We knew what we were looking for exactly.
Once the fire was out, the scene shifted from rescue to recovery. Crime scene units from the Texas Department of Public Safety, DPS, and Austin Police homicide detectives began processing what was left. It was after 2 a.m. when they entered. The cash register was open, and about $540 in cash was missing. Cleaning supplies were scattered, showing the girls had been interrupted mid-closing. The back door was unlocked and partially propped open. When investigators sifted through the waterlogged debris, they found a single clue that survived the heat: a .380 shell casing lodged in a floor drain. That casing was carefully bagged, labeled, and sent to the Texas DPS crime lab. No one realized at the time it would turn out to be the most important piece of physical evidence in the case. The girls' clothing was collected separately, every charred piece cataloged for possible DNA or fiber trace. Because of the condition of the bodies, investigators called in DPS crime scene technicians to take biological swabs before the victims were moved. Those swabs, taken at the scene and again during the autopsies, would eventually become the foundation of the entire case, decades later. Back in 1991, though, DNA testing was in its infancy. Labs could only determine if a sample contained male genetic material, not who it came from. The technology couldn't sequence or identify individuals with any degree of certainty. The evidence was fragile to begin with, burned, wet, and mixed with the victim's own tissue. Even so, the DPS lab reported something significant. Swabs taken from Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy all contained male DNA. Eliza Thomas's samples did not. That immediately told investigators two things. One, at least one man was involved, and two, the killer's DNA survived both fire and water. When the early results came back, analysts noticed the profiles weren't uniform. There were two distinct male DNA contributors. One was stronger and more complete, the other weaker and partial. That detail would go on to shape every theory about the case for decades. Two DNA profiles, two different calibers, two men reportedly seen near closing time. To the investigators in 1991, it seemed obvious there had to be at least two perpetrators. The register tape showed the last recorded sale at 11:03 p.m., 2 small frozen yogurts. That time became a cornerstone for the timeline. Witnesses reported the lights still on shortly after 11:10, but by 11:47 p.m., when a passing police patrol drove by, smoke was already rising from the roof. That left roughly a 40-minute window for everything that happened inside.
When I got inside the yogurt shop, I was in watering heat. That's how much the fire had come in there.
Turns out a lot of the firemen were kind of worried that they had disturbed the crime scene. You know, there was soot everywhere. So much of the evidence was probably contaminated. So taking fingerprints was kind of pointless, although we tried. We found a key left in the front door, but that was apparently part of the process of when they got ready to close, to put the key in the front door.
Inside the shop, the scene told its own story. Cleaning bottles were knocked over. Rags were still wet in the sink. The back door, which employees normally kept locked at night, was unlatched and propped open with a rolled-up towel. The register drawer was pulled out, cash missing, coins scattered across the counter. Chairs were still on tables, just as they'd be during closing cleanup. It looked like the girls were interrupted while closing. Investigators believe that sometime after 11, the killer entered through the unlocked front door, possibly pretending to be a last-minute customer. He may have pulled a gun immediately or used some kind of authority or familiarity to control them without resistance. At some point, the girls were forced from the front area into the back storage room, one of the most secluded spots in the shop. There, they were ordered to undress, their clothing used as bindings, bras, socks, and strips of fabric tied around wrists and ankles. The killer, or killers, shot each girl execution style in the head. The medical examiner would later confirm that at least 2 weapons were used, a .22 caliber revolver and a .380 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Amy Ayers, the youngest, was found several feet away from the others. She had been shot twice, once with each caliber. That suggests she may have survived the first shot long enough to try crawling away before the second, fatal round. After the murders, the killer attempted to erase everything. Paper towels, napkins, cardboard boxes, and cleaning supplies were piled near the bodies and set on fire. There was no chemical accelerant, which told investigators the fire was improvised. Not planned, just desperate. The inferno was hot enough to melt ceiling tiles and char everything in the room, but forensic testing later confirmed the girls were dead before the fire started. In the days after the murders, Austin police were flooded with calls. The city was in shock, and detectives went on local TV pleading for anyone who had been near the "I can't believe it's yogurt" shop on the night of December 6th, 1991 to come forward. Dozens of people responded, mostly customers and employees from neighboring businesses in the strip mall. Their statements began to form a rough picture of what may have happened before the fire. One of the key witnesses was a woman named Lucilla, who told police she saw two young white males sitting quietly inside the yogurt shop shortly before closing. One was described as thin and clean-cut, the other heavier with a round face. Both wore puffy jackets, which stood out because the weather that night wasn't especially cold. She remembered the two acting strangely, not talking much, just watching. Another customer told police that when she arrived for a frozen yogurt earlier that evening, she saw a man sitting in a light-colored car parked just outside the store. He was described as Hispanic in his 20s and appeared to be waiting for someone inside. Employees from nearby stores also gave statements. A pizza delivery driver remembered seeing two men standing near the door of the yogurt shop around 10:45 p.m., one holding it open while the other glanced over his shoulder toward the counter. Another worker at a video rental store recalled that the lights were still on at 11:15, but the shop looked empty. Police took all these accounts seriously. Composite sketches were drawn based on the two men seen inside, and another based on the man in the car. Detectives canvassed nearby neighborhoods, malls, and schools looking for anyone who matched the descriptions. Nothing solid came of it. Tips kept coming in, sightings of two suspicious guys or a car speeding off, but none could be verified. A week after the murders, police stopped 17-year-old Maurice Pierce at the North Cross Mall, just a few miles from "I can't believe it's yogurt." He was carrying a .22 caliber pistol, one of the same calibers used in the killings. Pierce told detectives he had loaned the gun to his friend Michael Scott the night of December 6th. He also mentioned two other friends, Robert Springsteen and Forrest Wellborn, who were all part of his small circle from McCallum High School. To investigators, it sounded like a break. 4 local teenagers, a gun, and a story that tied back to the night of the murders. Detectives wired Pierce and sent him to talk to Wellborn at a laundromat, hoping for a confession on tape. But Wellborn never took the bait. He seemed confused, didn't follow what Pierce was suggesting, and never admitted to anything. Then the ballistics test came back. The .22 caliber revolver Pierce had on him did not match the bullets or casings recovered from the yogurt shop. With no physical evidence and no confessions, the case stalled again. Months later, investigators chased another lead, this time across the border. In October 1992, Mexican authorities arrested Porfirio Villa Saavedra, 28, and Alberto Jimenez Cortez, 26, for an unrelated kidnapping and sexual assault. While in custody, they confessed to the Austin yogurt shop murders. For a brief moment, headlines declared the case solved. But when Texas investigators reviewed their statements, nothing matched the evidence. They described the wrong weapons, gave incorrect details about the shop, and got key facts completely wrong, including the number of victims. Both men later recanted, claiming their confessions were coerced. The lead went nowhere. The case went cold until 1999, when the FBI built a new criminal profile describing young, impulsive, disorganized offenders who likely fled Austin after the crime. That description fit Maurice Pierce and his friends perfectly. 4 teenagers who stole a car and drove to San Antonio the same night. All 4 were brought back in for questioning. By then, they were adults. Maurice had a daughter, Scott and Springsteen had jobs, and their lives had moved on until Austin detectives started asking again about December 6th, 1991. Michael Scott endured 22 hours of interrogation over 5 days. He denied everything at first, but detectives used psychological pressure, the Reed technique, to wear him down. They told him his friends had already confessed. They said the only way to help himself was to cooperate. After days without rest, Scott began repeating what they suggested. The number of guns, the bindings, the fire. The story wasn't his. It was the investigators. One detective told him, "You're a nice guy, Michael. Nice guys make mistakes." Soon after, police confronted Robert Springsteen in West Virginia, saying Scott had confessed and implicated him. Springsteen broke down and confessed too. Both men were charged with capital murder. In 2001, Springsteen was convicted and sentenced to death. In 2002, Scott received life in prison, but there was still no DNA match, no fingerprints, and no murder weapon, just 2 questionable confessions. Years later, Both convictions were overturned after courts ruled their statements had been used illegally against each other. And in 2010, Maurice Pierce, during a traffic stop, attacked a police officer, slashing his neck with a knife, and was shot and killed on the spot. He was 34 years old at the time.
The district attorney's office no-billed an Austin police officer almost killed in the line of duty on Christmas Eve. They also released some dash cam video from that night.
Give me something for his neck. Lay down. Get him down. Let me. He should have. It should be stab a knife. He shot my knife. You shot him in the stomach. Yeah.
A suspect slashed Officer Frank Wilson's throat after a traffic stop. He shot and killed that suspect, Maurice Pierce, and then collapsed in the street. Now, you may remember Pierce, the suspect killed, was originally charged along with 3 others in the yogurt shop murders, but charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. APD officials credit 3 officers for saving Wilson's life.
By 2008, DNA technology had come a long way since 1991. Forensic labs could now extract genetic material from even the smallest, most degraded samples, the kind that earlier tests couldn't identify.
Nearly a decade after the killings, 2 men were convicted of capital murder despite the lack of physical evidence. Those convictions were overturned on constitutional grounds, and those 2 were released in 2009. Both of them were later cleared by DNA testing.
When those men or boys were first being investigated, they weren't able to use DNA evidence to eliminate them, which, as we know, happened later on in the investigation.
For years, the case went cold until this summer when new testing on a .380 caliber shell casing left at the scene, plus DNA found underneath the fingernails of one victim, Amy Ayers, implicated Brashers.
The cold case reopened when Detective Dan Jackson took over the Austin yogurt shop cold case. He reviewed every piece of evidence, old reports, photographs, ballistic logs, and DNA records that had been tested and retested for more than 3 decades.
Some of the only really physical evidence that was recovered was one spent .380 shell casing that was located in the floor drain.
When Jackson had that casing re-entered into the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, NIBIN, in 2025, it hit on another unsolved murder, this one in Kentucky.
This is 43-year-old Linda Rutledge. Police say on November 7, 1998, they responded to help the Lexington Fire Department with a fire at a business on Malibu Drive. When they got there, they found a woman dead inside the back of the store, later confirmed to be Linda Rutledge.
We cover all the bases with any fire. That's what we do. Anytime we find a body where it's suspicious in nature or there's a fire inside, we want to take the precautions and the early steps in the investigation so we can cover all the bases on that so we don't come back later on and have to track backwards.
We looked through our reporting from 1998 here at LEX 18. Police told us at that time the fire took place at her family's business, Nixon Hearing Aid Center, and that she was an employee. Police say that when they found Linda's body here on 121 Malibu Drive, they found injuries that were unrelated to the fire, prompting more questions.
Pistol used in Austin had also been used in that Kentucky homicide. That specific gun model and serial number were traced back to a man named Robert Eugene Brashers, a violent drifter already linked by DNA to multiple rapes and murders across several states.
Genealogist C.C. Moore was the first to link Brashers to a spate of separate killings. On the show Genetic Detective, she traced his trail of murders and sexual assaults through Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Missouri.
The 1991 traffic stop records revealed that just 2 days after the yogurt shop murders, on December 8, 1991, Brashers had been stopped at a Border Patrol checkpoint outside El Paso, Texas, driving a stolen vehicle out of Georgia. Inside the car was the same pistol later tied to the Austin crime scene. At the time, he was released after being charged with auto theft and firearm possession. No one yet realized the weapon had been used in one of the most horrific crimes in Texas history.
Now, he's a man who police say is also responsible, they believe, for many other murders and violent assaults over the years. Those cases were also key in this breakthrough in the yogurt shop murders today. Now, for years, we have known investigators have been desperately working to identify an unknown man placed at the scene by DNA evidence that's known as a YSTR or Y profile. You'll hear them refer it to. Fast forward to this summer. Detective Jackson, who had taken over the case just a few years ago, determined that some evidence from one of the guns used, a .380, had not been submitted in years to a national network of ballistics data. They got a hit to an unsolved crime from the 90s in Kentucky.
The next breakthrough came through advanced YSTR DNA testing, which isolates male-specific genetic markers. Jackson ordered a nationwide manual search using a 27-marker YSTR profile, the same unknown male profile preserved from the 1991 evidence. There was only one match in the country, a sample from South Carolina, where Brashers' DNA had been entered years earlier in connection with the 1990 murder of Genevieve Jenny Zatricki. When Austin's unknown male DNA was compared to Brashers' sample, it was a perfect 27 for 27 match. To be certain, investigators retested Amy Ayers' fingernail clippings using new STR technology. That analysis produced a direct DNA match to Brashers, with a 1 in 2.5 million probability of belonging to anyone else. In other words, the man whose DNA was under Amy's fingernails was the killer. By that point, Robert Eugene Brashers had already escaped justice. He died by suicide during a 1999 standoff with Missouri police, using the very same model handgun connected to the Austin murders, but the evidence he left behind finally spoke for him. Brashers' background. At the time of the murders, Brashers was traveling across Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Texas, working short-term construction jobs. He was a serial predator who drifted from state to state, sometimes posing as a police officer, targeting women and girls, then disappearing before law enforcement could connect the dots. His crimes followed a pattern: binding, sexual assault, small caliber gunfire, and sometimes arson to cover his tracks. The yogurt shop murders fit that pattern exactly. Brashers, to evade law enforcement, often disguised himself, wearing wigs, changing his hair color, or altering his appearance to the point where even people who knew him wouldn't recognize him. He moved through towns incognito, blending in just long enough to strike and then vanish before anyone realized who he really was. Known crimes linked to Robert Eugene Brashers' attempted murder: Florida, 1985, shot 24-year-old Michelle Wilkerson twice after she rejected his advances. She survived and identified him. He served 3.5 years of a 12-year sentence. Murder of Genevieve Jenny Zatricki, South Carolina, 1990, assaulted and strangled the 28-year-old, leaving her in a bathtub with a threatening message written on the mirror: "Don't fuck with my family." This case was solved by DNA genealogy in 2018. Austin yogurt shop murders, Texas, 1991. 4 teenage girls, Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers, were shot execution style, and the shop was set on fire. Linked to Brashers in 2025 through YSTR, as well as ballistic evidence. Assault on a 14-year-old, Memphis, Tennessee, 1997. Broke into a home, tied up the occupants, and sexually assaulted a teenage girl. Later linked to Brashers through DNA. Double murder of Sherry and Megan Scherer, Missouri, 1998. A 38-year-old mother and her 12-year-old daughter were killed in their home. Both were shot with Brashers' .22 handgun. Hours later, he committed another home invasion in Dyer County, Tennessee. Same weapon, same method. Kentucky homicide link, 1998, still under investigation. Ballistics from Austin matched a 1998 Kentucky case, believed to involve a woman who was shot and the business set on fire. Kentucky officials have not yet formally named Brashers, but Austin police say the link is credible. Also, Brashers was known for impersonating police, carrying false IDs, stealing cars, and traveling with burglary tools, scanners, and weapons. He once even published a fake obituary under an alias to create a new identity. The pattern and the aftermath: Brashers operated across at least 5 states: Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, and Texas, and possibly Kentucky. For more than 30 years, Austin lived with one question: who could commit something so cruel? The answer finally came, decades after Brashers' death. DNA, ballistics, and persistence finally did what time never could: deliver the truth. When this case first broke, investigators were convinced there had to be 2 killers. 2 guns, 2 male DNA profiles, and 2 men seen inside the shop before closing. But 34 years later, police announced it was only 1 man, and they're following the evidence. If that's where the facts lead, that's what matters: the truth, even if it took decades to get there. The crime matched his MO, His gun matched the bullets, and his DNA was found under one of the victim's fingernails. There's no question Brashers was the killer, and the family finally got some answers. Brashers took the coward's way out, and that's just what he was, an evil coward. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.
Investigators emphasize that the detective work is still not over. There still are some leads to follow, but they do believe Brashers acted alone and is responsible for this infamous crime here in Austin.